there's kind of different tiers of subcontractor. Probably your biggest tier is those that are doing lawn maintenance and remodeling and any kind of construction activity that can really cause either damage to others, damage to your property, or truthfully, even workers' comp issues with their own employees.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
Today we have with us Jimmy Clark. Jimmy is Senior Vice President and Real Estate Practice Group Leader for Hardin, one of the Southeast's leading insurance, risk management, and employee benefits firms. Jimmy, thanks for joining us again on the Invest Florida Show episode of Lawfare.
Happy to be back.
Okay, so this is one of those issues that we're going to talk about for landlords, property owners, and subcontractors is a big risk point for them. When people are hiring the lawn maintenance guy or the person cleaning the pool or coming in to do some sort of tenant improvement work. I mean, that's, how you cover yourself and how you check the boxes is going to be really important, right?
Definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of your biggest risk points of dealing with the subcontractor?
I think anytime, there's kind of different tiers of subcontractor. Probably your biggest tier is those that are doing lawn maintenance and remodeling and any kind of construction activity that can really cause either damage to others, damage to your property, or truthfully, even workers' comp issues with their own employees.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, let's use the example that we've hired the lawn care guy. When we take on, we're property managers, right? And we have these conversations all the time with property owners. Frequently, we are taking over a property that an owner might be tired of managing, and he's done it or she's done it in a particular way. And we come in and we change some of the ways they're doing things because not only are they exposed, but we're exposed too if they're not properly covering. And it really is one of those points where you look at, again, lawn care. One national or regional firm is going to charge you one price, and the local mom and pop that has 2 or 3 people that work for them could be 30% less. They're used to using that guy, but there's a reason for that. I mean, it really has to come down to they're not, from a workers' comp standpoint and from an insurance standpoint, don't necessarily have to have the same number of coverage, which means that you're taking an exposure.
That's right.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about the general liability aspect first. Like, what should a property owner do to try to mitigate their risk on the general contractor or the independent contractor side?
So just talking about the liability perspective, and I'll give you quick examples, is if you have a landscaper, right? So the landscaper could be out cutting grass, obviously can, run their lawnmower into cars, can, hit a pipe, can do a lot of damage to either third parties, properties, including yourselves. So what you want to first make sure is they have general liability coverage. But on top of that, you want to make sure that your entity, the entity that has contracted them, is it named as an additional insured, not a certificate holder, but as an additional insured. On top of that, you'd also like to see that they have your entity named, saying that their insurance is primary to your insurance. So that means basically in a Florida where you have a contributory negligence state, that if they end up doing $100,000 in damage, but they're 70% negligent, you're 30% negligent, their insurance actually pays 100% of the claim and you're not popped for the other 30%.
Gotcha. So that's on the general liability side, and you're wanting to make sure that the property owner is named as additional insured. And what about the property managers? That both of them should be additionally insured?
If you can get them to add you as additional insured, I always think that's great.
Okay. And that's always a bit of an issue because frequently some of the insurance companies will charge to have an additional insured.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, $25 to $200, but a lot of the big insurance programs and even, some of the mom and pops have something called blanket additional insured endorsements. So don't ever be afraid to ask, because some of these people get it completely for free and they can add as many as they like.
Okay. Now, sticking with the landscaper, because that's probably the most common vendor that folks have on their property each and every week. Mm-hmm. One of the guys on the crew slips and falls, injures himself, and now she's entitled to workers' compensation. There are exemptions for workers' compensation, right?
Yeah, you can file exemptions. So I'll stick with the state of Florida, and it depends on what classification your industry's in, but you can have sometimes 4 or less employees and not even buy workers' compensation. Above that, it's actually a felony. But some of these folks may not even be buying it, or, file an exemption in the state of Florida where they say, we're not going to cover ourselves.
Okay. So that's typical of smaller firms. Again, we get back to the 3-man landscaping firm versus the regional firm that might have 100 employees. And you look at the two quotes, frequently that 3-person firm is going to quote considerably less than that regional firm is. And it might very well have to do with the fact that they are exempting themselves on the workers' compensation side and not paying that insurance. So their overhead is a lot lower, right?
Yeah, it may be that. And, one of the things, what you run into is if a smaller firm or a bigger firm in all that matter don't carry workers' compensation, you may have an employee that's injured that then tries to sue you, the owner or the property manager, for their injuries because they don't have any workers' compensation. Or B, they may hire basically employees, we'll call them 1099 or just cash employees, to come do work on the weekends or what have you, that aren't covered by, even if they had an exemption for their organization, wouldn't be covered by that exemption.
Mm-hmm. So now let's get back to the landscaper. One of their employees has slipped and hurt himself. What type of liability on the workers' compensation side would the owner, the property owner, the landlord have?
So there's a couple issues, right? So the first issue would be, number one, if they don't have workers' compensation, they could basically try to bring suit against you for their injuries. And if you don't have workers' compensation, and it's deemed that the employee was in your control of some sort, you could actually have an uncovered claim, which is a big issue and kind of a good reason if
an
you're
extraordinary expense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen it. We've seen a roofer before fall off a roof. It was just kind of a friend that the owner of the property hired to come re-roof for him. Didn't have workers' compensation, was injured. He came back against his friend, sued, and there was no coverage because that owner didn't have workers' compensation, and the general liability didn't cover it because it was deemed they were working under the control of the owner of the property. So that's always a sticky situation, and there's a lot of real estate clients that buy what's called an if any work comp policy, which is just like a $700 a year policy, but is that kind of catch-all if you do end up having an uninsured subcontractor on site. And to kind of further answer your question, let's pretend they did have workers' compensation. You want to make sure there's something called a waiver of subrogation in the favor of the owner of the property, that entity. Just because if, let's say they slipped and fell in a hole that you may have known the hole was there and they broke their ankle, well, the client or the landscaper may say, don't sue, but the insurance company may actually subrogate back against the owner. We've seen that happen too, and sue the owner for that hole and come back against your liability policy. But a waiver of subrogation stops that.
So this is our policy. As managers of property, we require, I don't care what size you are, if you're going to step foot on one of our properties, we require workers' compensation insurance. Are there any special requirements besides the waiver of subrogation? Is there an additional insured, or is there some other type of box that has to be checked? We're now making sure that the subcontractor, the landscaper in this case, has workers' comp insurance, but is there something else as a property owner or manager that one step further, like an additional insured that we need to worry about?
So I think the things for workers' compensation, only the waiver of subrogation. For general liability and auto liability, which a lot of people don't think about, but really should be covered, you want to make sure you're additional insured. And then if you can get it, make sure that their insurance is primary to your insurance, which should be in the description box.
Awesome. So you guys at Hardin do a lot of different types of insurance, but you specialize specifically in landlord owner related insurance, correct?
Yeah.
So remind me of the type of insurance or clients that you guys would go after at Hardin. Single family homes? Is it retail plazas, apartment complexes? What typically would you guys target?
So in our real estate practice group, we handle pretty much any size outside of really a lot of the major, huge institutional New York type funds we don't handle, but anything below that we handle. And we do it kind of from cradle to grave. So from raw lands all the way to fully developed and selling the assets and every single asset type.
Yeah. And I can listen, I mean, it's not gratuitous. I mean, we have dealt with a lot of different insurance companies, and the fact that when we come to you, we know that you know real estate issues. And there's a comfort in that to us because you guys have turned us on to some things that we weren't thinking about when we were going to other general insurance agents. So whether it's Hardin or another group, of course, we're hoping that maybe some of the folks might give you a call, but if not, make sure as a property owner, as a manager, as an investor, that the insurance company that you're working with understands landlord issues. I can't emphasize that enough. And you guys have really opened our eyes on some things we weren't doing in the past in terms of our practice. And so I appreciate you guys and your input there. Always happy to help. Jimmy, if folks want to get in touch with you to discuss one of these workers' comp or general liability issues, how would they go about doing that? They can give me a call. My direct line is 813-367-5609. Perfect. Jimmy, thanks again for joining us. I know we'll have you on further episodes. Perfect. Thank you.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Steven Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.